Hello and welcome to The Truth About Storytelling. I am Tyreen Martinson, and this podcast is my effort to encourage other writers and pull back the curtain on the writing life, kind of sharing both the triumphs and the struggles and everything in between, as well as some really fun things about the writing life and exciting opportunities that I'm just so blessed with. I am Christian, so I am going to mention my faith now and then, but the main theme and content of this podcast is going to be around writing, fiction, nonfiction, and poetry as an author. So I'm just going to jump right in today. I'll talk a little bit more about my books toward the end of the episode, but right now I just want to jump into the main part of my episode, which is all about mindset. Because a few days ago, and then again this morning, I had what I'm going to call a scarcity mindset panic. So scarcity mindset. I am sure that that's what I was struggling with the other day and a little bit today. And also the fear of failure, which is still essentially scarcity mindset. It's looking at the numbers of what things cost or the possibility that I might fail in my Kickstarter instead of looking at the possibility that I could succeed. So where it started is I was looking at those numbers of what it was going to cost to create a bespoke limited edition of my poetry collection. And I thought I had already done the research. I thought I had already crunched the numbers. I thought I knew how much everything was going to cost. And so looking at it again and finding different numbers was a really uncomfortable moment. And instead of getting excited, I started freaking out, like totally freaking out. I found out that Book Vault, which I think is an awesome company, by the way, their US printer does not do bespoke volumes. And I really, really, really want to do a bespoke limited edition volume of my poetry collection for my Kickstarter. So I need to order those from their UK printer and have them shipped to the United States. And I didn't even look at the shipping costs right away. I just was looking at the, oh no, I can't do it the way I thought I could do it. And was just kind of freaking out about that. And I was beginning to just really worry about expenses. And I, again, just started freaking out before I really finished fully researching. And in fact, before I finished fully researching how much it costs to ship books, I started looking at other places in the United States that could create bespoke volumes and other places overseas that's known for doing some really beautiful bespoke books and comic books. And I came up with this huge list of places to check. And so I started going through that list, and every place I looked either had a minimum print run of 250 books, or they had a base book price of $41, which is a little more bespoke than I had in mind, or a little more bespoke of a price that I had in mind, because that's $41 before shipping. All right, so before it gets shipped to me, before I ship it out, before all of those things happen. And I was thinking, oh no, what if no one wants to support a Kickstarter where that's like the base price of something, right? That's again, feeling freaked out about costs, feeling freaked out about the possibility of failure, having that scarcity mindset just set in, and knowing that I need to pay myself back for the work that I'm putting into this Kickstarter edition, both to recognize the effort that it took for me to write the poetry, and the time and effort that it's taken to do the formatting, and the time and effort of creating the book cover and the book design, which I am doing myself with Canva Pro tools and stock images, and all the work with getting everything just ready to go, and treating my art like it's something that's worthwhile, and also being financially responsible as an author entrepreneur. All of these things are really important to me, along with creating a beautiful book edition for readers to enjoy. And because this is what I do sometimes when I have a panic mode, I started going in this like existential like thought process of how do we measure time in our society? How do we show value? We usually assign $1 to it. And I want to have the freedom to be able to continue to create, and those dollar signs give me that. And anyway, on and on. I was going off on that tangent. So, and I had a bit of a panic. I was freaking out about the details, telling my husband about it, and he said, you need to take a walk. And I kind of growled at him, like really growled at him. This is the other day when it happened the first time. And I went back down to my computer and worked on some things for a while. And then I finally decided he was probably right? And I went for a walk. And so I went, and it really turned my mindset around. And that's true of when I went for a walk when all of this first kind of blew up in my face, and also even this morning when I was struggling with scarcity mindset again. When I go out and I walk and I gaze out at the tall wild grasses on the side of the country road we live on, the dandelions, the daisies, the beautiful flowers, and the maple trees that people have actually planted, as well as the upstart maples that have decided to grow up through the blackberry bushes. And the blackberry bushes are flowering now as they're getting ready for the bees to pollinate them so they can produce amazingly delicious sweet fruit later in the summer. And yeah, sure, there's a plane going by overhead and there's traffic on the road, but all of this reminds me that God is good all the time, and there's this abundance all around me. There's an abundance of life and growth and joy in the flowers and the plants and the greenery. And all of this helps me remember I can do this. So one of the flowers that I forgot to mention in my initial list there was the foxgloves. Foxgloves can be planted, but they are often volunteers in the Pacific Northwest. They're these beautiful, tall, interesting, and according to a friend of mine, kind of alien-looking flowers. Again, I think they look pretty natural because I've lived here all my life. But my friend who thinks they look a little alien, she's from the Bahamas, and she just thinks they look like really bizarre plants. But they're really, really tall, and they have these bell-shaped flowers that come off of them that are either purple or white. And once planted, again, they will volunteer all over the place because the birds will scatter the seeds the way birds do. And by the way, foxglove has a scientific name, digitalis. One of the reasons it's good to know what they are is because actually they are potentially toxic. If you're a gardener, be careful with foxglove or digitalis. They are a beautiful, beautiful plant, and you can definitely garden with them, especially if you have kind of a wild side to your garden. They grow really, really well, and they won't take over other things. They're not too weedy that way. But digitalis used to be used as a type of heart medicine. So handling foxgloves has to be done with care and should be done with gloves. And you definitely don't want to ingest them at all, or even have them on your skin for too long, because they can cause your heart to have palpitations. So they are these beautiful flowers, and they're out there in all this greenery and abundance, but yet there's a caution to them. So part of the reason I know this strange thing about foxgloves, and by the way, this does come back to my point really, part of the reason I know this strange thing about foxgloves is because I grew up with a mom who had what I call a backyard horticulturist type knowledge. She studied all the gardening books she could get her hands on from the library. She planted things that she found in wild places along the edges of the roads where we lived. She'd dig up just a little plant, and then she'd bring it home and plant it in our yard and experiment with it and play with it. And She had at one point a whole acre of yard with about 20 different garden beds in it, and they were not the neatly trimmed hedgerow type gardens. No, no, no. They were these really natural looking gardens that she very carefully trimmed so they would look like the plants were water falling into each other just, on their own without any help. However, I knew because she spent so many hours out there that there was a lot of help going on. There was a lot of work in that garden. And she often had people who would come by and stop and ask her if they could look at her garden and wander around. She never got to be part of any of the official garden tours in the town that we lived in because people actually thought that those plants came up naturally without help, which again is funny to me because I knew she spent a minimum of 4 hours a day gardening spring, summer, and fall, and she spent some time out there in the winter too, unless there was ice or snow on the ground. So I have this appreciation for plants that comes from my mom and also my dad, who appreciates organic gardening and organic vegetable gardens. And I do understand the desire for neatness in plants because I do know that it takes a lot of work to really shape a garden bed to look the way you want it to. My mom is an artist, a visual artist. She paints, she draws, she's carved wood sculptures. She's done a lot of different types of visual arts, but I always thought that her biggest piece of visual art was our yard when I was growing up. It was a giant tapestry of her love of plants and gardening and birds and butterflies and bees. So again, I know they can take a lot of work. I know gardens can take a lot of work, and again, there are plants out there that are toxic but yet also beautiful that can make up a really nice part of the garden. Bees really like foxglove plants. They are very useful plants if you want to have a pollinator garden. So what does this have to do with what I was talking about earlier and everything else going on in my writing life? Well, again, when I go out and look at the world around me, instead of just staring at my computer, I move from scarcity mindset to abundance mindset. But I also know some of that abundance needs to be trimmed. And some of that abundance needs to be handled with care, like a poisonous plant might need to be handled with care. And all of this, to me, is kind of like writing poetry. In poetry, you can find beauty with a trimmed, perfectly boxed sort of poem, like a sonnet. Or you can find beauty with a wildflower garden of words that comes together for a single idea or narrative. And there's different types of poems as there are different types of gardens. And I think they can all be celebrated. Unlike boxy, perfectly trimmed hedgerows, I actually think perfectly outlined, worded sonnets and other types of formed poetry bound with rules can sometimes force me as a poet to be unique in my language. Sometimes they force me to look for words that I might not have otherwise thought of, and they help me expand my vocabulary. They become kind of a puzzle, like a wordle or an anagram or a crossword. And they're really fun to write that way for me. And again, like I said, they force me into a kind of creativity. But that isn't the only thing a poem can be. They can also be wild and unformed and kind of brought together slowly through little tiny bits of trimming so that they look completely unplanned, but actually there's a theme, actually there's a narrative, actually there's a point to them. Even if it looks like a jumble of words on the page, you know that you could spend hours on it, trimming it to just the right shape and getting those words hopefully to waterfall into each other. And sometimes it feels like there isn't just the right word, and you have to come up with something that's close and hope that the readers understand what you mean. But like I said, poetry, like gardens, can have many different forms and be wildly abundant, both in the set, very highly trimmed type hedgerow poems and gardens, to the wildflower gardens, and even to the gardens that follow a winding path through a narrative, or the poetry that follows a winding path through a narrative. I know a lot of people don't think of poetry as being narrative or even like an essay, but there are some similarities between all of those forms of writing. There's always a sense of introduction, whether it's a surprise or some kind of bold statement, or maybe something softer. Within the poem, there's always an introduction, and it slowly builds to the main theme, and then it keeps building and building to reach a kind of crescendo. But there's a turning point usually in most poems at that crescendo, and that turning point moves the idea slightly. Maybe it doesn't subvert it exactly or go in the opposite direction, but it causes you to look at things from a new angle. It's almost like a plot twist. And it's about 2/3 or 3/4 of the way through. About the same place you'd put a climax, crescendo, or major plot twist in a story or essay. And then there's the tapering off, the denouement, as you might say in story writing or essay writing. And then there's a bit of an end to it. Sometimes in poetry that ending is understated, and sometimes it's kind of ends on a bang, and sometimes it ends with a reprise of the theme that came out at the very beginning of the poem. And this happens even in really short forms of poetry like haiku, where you typically have 3 lines in the Western American version of haiku. The original Japanese form is actually about syllable length and tones, and there's a cut in the poem, which would be right at the turning point. And the form may be different, and we've definitely Americanized it and changed it a bit with Western culture, but that idea is still there. You have an image, and then you have a change, and then you have an ending, and that comprises the haiku. But speaking of turning points and narrative, that's what happened to me the other day when I went for a walk. It's what happened to me today when I went for a walk. I started out maybe in a panic, in a scarcity mindset, but here I am now talking about abundance and poetry and the beauty of words and flowers, and my whole perspective has shifted. When I first recorded this podcast, I actually recorded it while I was walking, and unfortunately there was a lot of road noise, so I couldn't keep all of that. But the wild thing about attempting to draft a recording for a podcast while walking is not only are there cars, but there are kind of fun people to talk to. So I was stopped by a gentleman who told me about a cherry tree in bloom and how he'd managed to grab a couple of cherries before the birds did. So I went up to the cherry tree and managed to get a couple, even though it took a little bit of work. I had to pull down one branch to get another branch that was attached to come further down so I could grab 3 cherries. I'm definitely not going to harvest any more, but that cherry tree, that beautiful cherry tree overhanging the road, again, reminded me of the amazing abundance that there is in this world, and that wonderful conversation with a neighbor that I don't really know, since I was about a half a mile from my house when I talked to him. But it reminded me that there is such beauty in this world, and we need to celebrate those moments probably more than I know I normally do. And yeah, sure, there's awful things out there, but there's so much beauty around us too. And to me, that's the difference between having a scarcity mindset and abundance mindset, seeing the world as all the promise, all the blessing, all the amazing good things I could give thanks for, and instead of seeing just the bad stuff. And I really think for me that I need to go for walks to have that difference between that scarcity and abundance mindset. I love the ability to use my computer for a lot of things. I mean, right now I'm recording using my computer and a microphone, and it's super helpful. But I don't want to stare at my computer all day long because it's just simply not healthy for me. And I need to have that abundance mindset in my life instead of scarcity mindset. And so all of that said, I went back to actually research more of the costs for what it would take for me to have bespoke limited editions printed by Book Vault at their UK facility, which is their first facility. It's their largest facility. And I realized that I could have bespoke limited editions created for my poetry collection and have them shipped to my house for less than what some of the US bespoke limited edition type places were going to charge me. And so I think that's what I'm going to do. And I'm really glad I finally really looked at all of the numbers and had a better idea of what the Kickstarter might take for me to put together. I definitely want to put out some gorgeously beautiful bespoke editions of the poetry collection into the world. But I do plan for it to be a limited print run, and Book Vault does those, and I'm thankful for that. And I will not be like giving a number for how many books I'm going to print for the Kickstarter, because it's going to really depend on how many people sign up for a bespoke limited edition. So if 50 people sign up, there will be 50 copies, or maybe there'll be 52 or 55 because I want one for me. I'm probably going to give one to my parents. I'm probably going to give one to my in-laws. I might give one to each of my daughters. But again, at the most, if there are 50 people that sign up for a bespoke limited edition, at the most, I'll have 55 printed. If 200 people sign up for a bespoke limited edition, there'll be 205 copies out there, and so on and so forth. I don't know how many people will sign up for a limited edition copy. Maybe only 10 will. And I really thought about that, and I thought, is it still worth it to me? Yeah, it is. I really want to have at least a few copies of a beautiful limited edition hardback of To Speak out there in the world. And I'm excited to be able to put that project together. And if everyone else that comes and joins my Kickstarter campaign signs up for an ebook or an encouragement tier where it's, a small little like $2, $5 type thing, I am going to be blessed by that. Whether it's, again, a huge amount of support or a small amount of support, all of it is hugely encouraging in its own way. And so I am going to look at it from that abundance mindset. I'm going to look at the possible outcome and the possibilities of success instead of, the scarcity mindset and the what if I fail. And also looking for my own sake, at what I really feel looks like a successful Kickstarter campaign when it's going to be my first one ever, and it will be for a poetry collection. And I don't know how popular or unpopular those are. So I'm thinking smaller, probably, campaign-wise. But again, I'm still excited to do it. I want to try this process. I really want to create a nice limited edition copy of that book. And so what's going to happen for that, because of the timeline of my summer and the year, and also the timeline of creating bespoke limited editions, is that when my Kickstarter goes live, that'll be about a month, right? And then I'll have final numbers on who wants bespoke limited editions at the end of that. And then from there, it will probably take 2 to 3 weeks for the printing process to take place, if all goes well and they aren't slammed with multiple authors, like hundreds of authors asking for limited editions. So all goes well, be 2 to 3 weeks for the print process. Then they'll be shipping to my house. Then I'll sign them, and then I'll be shipping them out individually from here. So all of that is probably going to be another, I'm going to say 2 to 3 to maybe 4 weeks. And that's, again, if everything goes perfectly and the printer is not slammed with people who need and want limited editions like today. I don't know. I might be in line behind 100 other authors. I'm not sure yet. So anywhere between 6 weeks to 3 months is probably how long the fulfillment process is going to take for my Kickstarter. And at first I was feeling kind of panicked about that and unhappy about it. And then I thought, it actually works out really well. If I start my Kickstarter in July and I run it through like early August, and then I put in for the print run at Book Vault, like I fulfill the ebook copies and stuff, but I put in my book order at Book Vault, and it takes them 2 to 3 weeks or maybe a month to get those books to me. That's actually perfect timing because I'm going to Mongolia and I wouldn't be able to fulfill things then anyway. So I'll be gone. My husband will hopefully receive, book boxes. And then when I get back, I can sign them and send them. And hopefully that will be like perfect timing, actually, with all of the exciting life events that I've got going on. At least that's my hope. That's my dream of how this is all going to work out. I don't know for sure that that's how it will work out. I do intend to fulfill any Kickstarter backer rewards within 2 to 3 months. I'm hoping it doesn't take longer. I have had some experience, or not experience, but I have heard other authors having struggles with fulfilling their orders up to maybe 6 months out. So I'm just going to say 6 weeks to 6 months is how long it's going to take me to fulfill those. And I am really trying to think ahead about how the timing of this is working out in my life, so it makes sense for everything. And I'm planning to have everything set up for the fulfillment when I leave for the trip to Mongolia. So basically, when I come home, I'll probably sleep for a day or two, and then I will have a whole list of specific items I need to do to fulfill anything it's not digital that I can do when I get back. So that's my dream plan. And I will be asking God to bless that and hope that the timing is within God's designs too, and not just, my my ambitious ideas, because I do struggle with that. I will be honest. I have really big ambitions, and sometimes I need to trim them a little bit. They are like the wildflowers. They might be a little dangerous, like foxglove, and sometimes I have to handle them with care, and also place them in front of God and pray over them and say, okay, these are all these big ideas and big plans that I have, big ambitions, big goals, big dreams, and I ask God to show me what are the ones that He's ready to bless, and which ones are going the way that are more in His way instead of just my way, and which ones are reasonable. Sometimes I have to think about that. So it's a tough thing. I'm a big idea person, and I also am good at strategy, but the ideas sometimes are like huge and the strategy comes after. So that's the management part of things. And I'm getting better at it, but it does take some time. One of the things that I wanted to mention about my Kickstarter, in addition to all my big goals and the fulfillment process that I hope takes place, is that I have a plan for the book cover. I have 2 different designs that I really love. I've received some wonderful feedback from different people on Instagram and Facebook and in messages, and I'm going to put the names of everyone who has given me feedback on my cover in my acknowledgement section, as long as they're okay with that. So I'm looking forward to doing that, but because I am truly thankful for all the help that I have received with feedback for the book covers and with help I've received on other aspects of the book. So one of the things that I'm doing slightly differently, normally I talk about my health goals at the beginning of the podcast, but I'm going to mention it here because I have been talking about walking and about mindset and things like that. So one of the things that I have changed recently is I have changed my desk to a standing desk. Now, I had a desk before that went up and down. It's the same desk, actually, but I have set it into the standing position, and I've decided this is the only way I am going to do work at my desk, is in the standing position, which means, yes, my legs get a little tired, but I really need to stand up. I seem to hurt my back when I sit down and stare at my computer. I don't intend to. I try to, tell myself I'm going to sit up straight. I have alarms go off to remind me to sit up straight, and I keep hunching over. So I have a desk in standing position right now, and it's really helping my back. So it's my recommendation for authors out there. If you find yourself hunching over your computer, try to see if you could work standing up. And you don't necessarily have to get fancy with a standing desk. You can do it at a kitchen counter or someplace like that. I have met authors who have written novels while standing at kitchen counters. So it's definitely a possibility. You don't have to stay hunched over like Gollum when you're writing your book. And it's kind of funny, but I've been thinking about how many ways I could possibly mention like Lord of the Rings references while I'm doing my podcast. I don't know why it's been a thing in the back of my mind lately. It might be because I was talking about landscapes in the last episode, but also because I'm looking forward to the Mongolia trip, and I'm wondering what it's going to be like based on the elevation and the pictures of landscapes I've seen. I keep thinking it might be similar to Wyoming or Montana, where there's just big open sky, high elevation, the sense of vast landscape and high plains living. So I'm looking forward to all of that, but I'm also looking forward to how I hope God will work in me and through me to encourage other people the way I feel like I've been encouraged and loved by God throughout my whole life. I hope I can encourage others who believe in Christ, and I also hope that I can encourage people who don't know Christ to maybe consider believing in God as a possibility. So all of this is going to take place so quickly this summer, and yet it feels also so far away. And that reminded me, that sense of, how fast things are coming, but also how far away it feels. It's how long I've been thinking about going on a mission trip like this. When I was 17 years old, my high school asked students to write on a form and say what their quote was that they usually said and what their goals were in 2 to 3 sentences, and then write down all their activities they did while they were in high school. And that went into our yearbook. And I found an old copy of my yearbook, and this was what I wrote when I was 17 years old. This was my goal. Travel around the world with only a backpack, carrying my most precious and needed belongings. A Bible, a pair of high tops, a comfortable change of clothing, a notebook to write in, necessary toiletries, and then some kind of map. Then write a few books and publish them, become a known author, and be content with life. So I think it's kind of awesome that that's what my goal was when I was 17 years old. It makes me a little sad that it's taken me this long to get to a point where I will be going on a mission trip more than 3 decades later. But I am going to be going, and I have traveled other places with a backpack, carrying my most precious and needed belongings, including a Bible, clothing, a notebook to write in, and necessary toiletries, and some kind of map. I don't usually wear high tops anymore because my feet need a little bit more support, but in all, I have kind of kept to that goal. And then that idea of writing a few books and publishing them. Boy, I made it sound like it was easy, right? Become a, quote, known author and be content with life. Well, I have written some books. I have published them. I don't quite know if I'm really a, quote, known author yet. I think it depends on what you mean by what I mean by known. And to be content with life. To be content with life is something of a long-term goal, and at the same time, it's less of one now than it used to be. I want to live a fully realized life, and that means that I'm going to trust God, and I'm going to trust God even in my sorrow and even in my struggles. And it's not necessarily about being content. It's about seeking God's joy that He gives me and seeking out the love that God has given me and kind of holding that close, being content with God's love and the joy that He's given me, even if my circumstances aren't perfect or even if I have a struggle. So that part of my goal has changed. But I think it's interesting that that was my goal when I was 17 years old, and I'm finally getting to a place where I feel like I'm fulfilling it. So this has been a very rambly episode. I hope you can see that I have moved from a scarcity mindset to an abundance mindset. And not just because of the flowers or the way the squirrels are chasing each other around or the way the crows stalk across the neighbor's lawn trying to own it for themselves. And not just because of all the people who go out and celebrate in the sunshine here in the Northwest, because we don't get it all year, but because of God's magnificent love. And because I know I'm loved, I'm able to get up in the morning, and I'm thankful for the people in my life, like my husband, who say, you know, you might need a walk today when I get into scarcity mindset. I think that God works through all of those circumstances and things to help remind me of His love for me and His love for each and every person. So that's mainly that movement from scarcity to abundance mindset is what this podcast has been about. I did want to share with you some of those details about my Kickstarter and the thought process going into that and into the Mongolian trip. But I am going to mention one thing for my next episode. I will be talking about deer. Deer in my driveway, deer in my yard, and deer in my poetry. And I will be sharing a little bit about deer in a poem that I'll read on the next podcast. Before I leave, I want to mention that I have a newsletter giveaway this month, and it has nothing to do with poetry. I am giving away copies of my short story collection, 25 Impossible Tales of Survivors, Flawed Heroes, and Annoyed Villains, with a particular book funnel giveaway. So you have to sign up on the link that will be in the show notes for that. And it's a collection that I'm really proud of. It's a little quirky. It's a little unexpected in some ways. But I loved writing those stories, and I love putting that collection together. So thanks for joining me today and going on this journey with me from scarcity to abundance. I'll see you next time when I'll be reading some poetry and talking more about those deer.